What's up guys, I'm Roderick, aka Rodman, and welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about and ranking the worst class from each Souls game. This is obviously my personal opinion. All of these classes can be very good. If you like retro video gaming, anime, and gameplay videos, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more content just like this. So let's get right into the video. I really do hate to say this because I think faith strength builds and more paladin type builds are super cool, but in Demon Souls I don't think there's a point of ever choosing the priest class. If you guys don't know, the priest class pretty much revolves around using things like halberds and using miracles. But the thing is, there's classes like magician and sorcerer who can do the exact same thing but better. So why would you ever choose priest? The only benefit really I can see of choosing priest is choosing sorcerer or a magician at the very beginning of the game is actually really hard because you don't have any endurance, and all your stats are very low. Whereas the priests, they start off with like really good armor and pretty good stats across the board. But as the game goes on, they really do fall off a cliff. But I really do wish the priest got a bit more love. I love paladin builds, but it is quite lackluster in Demon Souls. So let's go ahead and move on to Dark Souls 1. So for the worst class in Dark Souls 1, I am going to go with the Thief. I know that people might be upset by this choice, but before I even get into it further, every class in this series is good, but there's just some classes that are just straight up worse than other classes. The reason why I say the Thief is the worst class in Dark Souls 1 is because it actually has the lowest stats out of any class except for the luck stat, which is practically useless. I don't want to say it's useless completely. It does have its uses with crits and stuff like that. But it does have a few redeeming factors, such as starting with the master key and a pretty good dexterity stat. If you're really good at Dark Souls, the Thief can actually be a good choice if you're a parry god. But if you're not very good at the Souls games, if you're not a parry god, then I would advise to stay away from the Thief class. But that's what I believe the worst class is in Dark Souls 1. It's still a good class, but you do have to be pretty freaking good at the game to maximize the benefits of the crit and the Hornish ring and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and move on to Dark Souls 2. So the worst class in Dark Souls 2, hands down, I believe it is the Explorer. Now, there's one reason why I believe the Explorer is the worst class in Dark Souls 2. That's because I believe it was purposely put in the game to help newcomers get through the early game. Everybody knows that that's the hardest part of the Souls franchise, is getting through the early game. As you get deeper and deeper into the game gets easier and easier because you have more things in your arsenal to use. But the Explorer, it has no benefit. The stats are super low and super mid. You'll be better off choosing something like a warrior or a knight or literally anything else. If you're going to choose Explorer because it has a bunch of life gems at the beginning of the game, that is a really crappy reason to choose that class. It's kind of sad, actually. The Explorer isn't a terrible class, but compared to all the rest of the classes in Dark Souls 2, the Explorer has no gain, no benefits. It's just super mid. That's a perfect way to describe this class. It is super mid. You get no benefits, no bragging rights for using the Explorer. So let's go ahead and move on to Dark Souls 3. So for the worst class in Dark Souls 3, I'm going to go with the Assassin. At first, I was going to go with the Herald, but just looking at what the Assassin brings to the table, there is literally no point of playing the Assassin when you can play the Thief. The Thief offers more variety in build, whereas playing the Assassin, you are pretty much limited to only a few type of builds. His stats is very low for the beginning of the game. It's actually one of the hardest classes to choose for the early game. On top of that, his stat distribution is very terrible. The armor that you get is very terrible. And of course, these things don't matter as much as the game goes on, but just what the Assassin brings to the table is just very lackluster. It's pretty much the same thing as playing a worse version of the Thief. Assassin is literally the Thief but worse, so why not just play the Thief? The Thief is a lot better than it was in Dark Souls 1. It's actually a quite respectable class, so I advise you to stay away from the Assassin. Just play the Thief, play something else. They really could have made this class so much more cooler, but yeah, the Assassin is very lackluster compared to the Thief and all the other classes that are offered in Dark Souls 3. So let's go ahead and move on to Bloodborne. So the worst origin class in Bloodborne, I believe, is Cruel Fate, because this is a class that is centered around arcane builds, which I believe they can be interesting if you want to switch your playstyle up, if you're used to more melee and equality builds and you want to do something different, then yeah, cool. Cruel Fate can be something cool to do. But to maximize your damage and your efficiency of playing Bloodborne, this is not a class that you are going to want to choose. Why? Because the stats is going to give you a pretty hard early game because of the stats of Mercenary and Troubled Childhood and Violent Past. They're going to make your early mid game very good, whereas Cruel Fate is going to give you a more difficult early game to mid game, just because of the stat distribution. On top of that, you're not going to really get your hands on arcane weapons until, the midpoint of the game. If arcane weapons were available in Bloodborne from the very start, then this probably could be one of the best classes in the entire game. But just from the nature of the combat style of Bloodborne, you are going to go with something more strength and skill based and more physical, just to maximize your rally and just maximize your damage. But let's go ahead and move on to Eldenring, since Sekiro does not have any classes. So for the worst class in Eldenring, I'm definitely going to go with the Bandit. The Bandit is pretty lackluster in every area. If you look at what the game puts an emphasis on its strengths, you can find another class that does it way better. For example, the Bandit is obviously dexterity based, but why play the Bandit? We can play something like the Prisoner, or you can play a hero, somebody that is literally built around dex, or you can play the Samurai, somebody that does a lot of damage and that's way better than the Bandit. Another thing that makes the Bandit very mid is that there's an emphasis on using long range weapons such as crossbows and short bows and long bows, and those weapons have always been mediocre in the Souls games. I wish they would make those weapons a lot better and more viable, but as of now, those weapons are not the greatest. So in turn, that will make the class not the greatest. On top of that, this is stats are not very good. The stat distribution is just very mediocre. But tell me what you guys think. I know this list probably is going to make some people upset, but if you like the video, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more content just like this. Rawman out, and happy holidays.